This week, the 10th Emergency Special Session of the UN General Assembly resumed its discussion on the situation in Gaza. Once again, most member states called for an immediate ceasefire and the release of hostages, while expressing solidarity with UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. The session also adopted not one but two resolutions with overwhelming majorities. One carried a rather lengthy title, Support for the Mandate of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. The other was titled simply, Demand for a Ceasefire in Gaza. In essence, the resolutions did exactly what their titles suggest. Well, initially, we expected the emergency special session and the adoption of the two resolutions to dominate the headlines this week. But as it turns out, not just me, but many of my colleagues were mistaken. Syria, for the first time in years, has unequivocally returned to the center of global discussions. After a rebel group took control of Damascus, Russia and several African countries in the Security Council called for a closed-door consultation on the situation in Syria. Well, what did everyone say? What do you think of the situation now unfolds in Syria?
We are following the situation very closely, and we want to see the situation stabilize as soon as possible. And we do hope that an inclusive political process can be initiated as soon as possible. And the factions and parties in Syria should take the interests of the people as their priority.
All of these things require a lot of actors, so there's been a huge amount of diplomacy over the weekend with phone calls and meetings. My Prime Minister is on the way to the Middle East right now, and he'll be having talks with countries in the neighbourhood. So I think there's a lot of diplomacy going on. It needs to include the P5, it needs to include countries of the region, but ultimately it's about the Syrian people and getting behind them and their aspirations for a better future.
What I can share is that, according to diplomats, all council members agreed on one key point. Stability is crucial during this period, and an inclusive government must be formed as soon as possible. But beyond that, a wide range of issues were raised, including chemical weapons, accountability, but consensus was limited. The rebel group now in control, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is an officially designated terrorist organization by the Security Council. And this raises a pressing question. How will the Council address this? Will the Security Council consider delist the terrorist group?
We will try. I think it is important that we try our best to prevent a resurgence of the terrorist groups.
Well, the U.S. considering delisting HTS as the terrorist group so far.
Look, they remain a designated terrorist organization.
Then how would this play out?
Well, let's let it play out and let's see. We're going to judge them by their actions, but they remain a designated terrorist organization. It's still in place right now, but this is a ever-changing situation right now. Let's see how things play out, but we're going to protect our interests, which is making sure that U.S. personnel are secure.
Any thoughts from Secretary General? There's one issue here for the future in Syria, which is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is labeled as terrorist group.
Indeed, it is.
Personally, I didn't see how this would play out, but from the Secretary General's point of view, how would this thing be solved? Would they be like delist as terrorist group from the Security Council, or what kind of criteria?
I understand where you're getting at. Security Council will take whatever decisions Security Council makes. We have to deal with the immediate in the reality now. As in other places, we have contacts with de facto authorities for operational reasons within our mandate, right? That's permissible and acceptable, and is critical to us being able to fulfill the mandates that member states and even sometimes the Security Council themselves have given us.
Well, meanwhile, following the fall of the Assad government, Israel launched what the IDF described as a temporary measure to control and expand the buffer zone in the Golan Heights. In addition, the IDF carried out massive strikes, effectively crippling Syria's military capacity. Anything the UN wanted to say. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that Golan Heights will be part of State of Israel for eternity. What is the reaction of the Secretary General of this?
Well,
for his words.
We continue to consider the Golan Heights occupied territory. I think we were very clear about the violation of the disengagement agreement following the IDF occupation of the buffer zone.
During the last couple of days, they actually targeted 320 Syrian military targets, which including the whole Syrian Navy fleet. What is the Secretary General's position on this kind of action?
I think, first of all, Mr. Pedersen addressed that this morning. It is very clear that we stand against any violation of the territorial integrity of Syria. We are against these types of attacks. I think this is a turning point for Syria. It should not be used by its neighbors to encroach on the territory of Syria. It should be used by all those in the region and beyond to support the Syrian people so they can choose their own path.
Well, many believe this marks the beginning of a new chapter for the Syrian people. But what that chapter holds remains uncertain, and we will continue to cover the story as events unfold. And that's all from me.